Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have an unboxing of the Nubia Z60 Ultra Leading version. Let's get started. This device is going to be very similar to the traditional Nubia Z60 Ultra, but in this case, with a slightly more powerful chip than the last generation. Honestly, there are a few differences, so let's get to know it. One of the most attractive points of this device will be its price. Since in Mexico it has been launched from 12,999 pesos, the overall price of the most basic edition is $649. On the other hand, there is an edition with 1 terabyte of storage and 16 gigabytes of RAM, which has a price in Mexico of 16,499 pesos, and its global price is $879. Definitely that is an exaggeratedly competitive price. It's going to be very difficult for you to find anything better in this price range. So join me in taking it out of its box. And as you can see, we are straight into the device, which has a very attractive design, a rather peculiar pattern on this back cover, which reflects differently the brightness. It comes with this dual finish. The part of the camera module is completely in black color, giving it also this outstanding red effect which characterizes the Nubia brand. Also, it does look like a very photography focused device, but as I tell you, it's pretty much the same as the Nubia Z60 Ultra. Let's get it powered up, and while we're at it, let's see what else comes here in the box. And as you can see, we come across this little box. Let's go ahead and open it up. First, we're going to find the tool to remove the tray. Then we're going to find a quick start guide. Simple, better known as the paperwork of a lifetime. And then, notice it comes with a case included in its box. This sleeve is rigid, we're not going to find a flexible design. You'll also notice that it's transparent, so it's probably going to turn a little bit yellow over time. But I think it's fine. In fact, the corners come super reinforced to give a good protection to the device, although on the frame side it doesn't seem to be as protected. But either way, it looks like a considerably sturdy device. Let's see what else comes around here in the box. In this part we come across the cable, which is from USB-C to USB-C with Nubia's signature red color as well. That's all that comes in this little box. It honestly seems like a lot of box for so little content. And there's another box here where the charger will surely come. And it also includes your 80-watt charger. That's a pretty powerful charger. So that's the contents of the box. Let me put it back in storage and we'll focus on the cell phone and find out the rest of its features. It's 8.78 millimeters thick and weighs 246 grams. Being a flagship device, we obviously did not expect it to be very light. In fact, it has quite advanced sensors in the cameras. And all that obviously causes the device to be a little heavier. At the design level, it has a switch on this side to quickly enter the camera. Something that is interesting. Although it is curious that in this case, they have not put some trigger as we have in the Nubia Focus Pro, which is a mid-range device. So it would have been interesting to see also that button for the camera shutter on a high-end device. It also has Gorilla Glass and it has IP68. So on a ruggedness level it is well covered, as it should be in a high-end device. However, this device is not priced at a high-end price point, but it is priced at a sort of premium mid-range or high-end entry-level price point, so it can get to compete in a very good way. The screen is 6.8 inches and it's diagonal. It has Full HD Plus resolution, 120 Hz refresh rate. And as you notice, the front camera is below the screen. This front camera is 12 megapixels. Although being underneath the screen, the result you're going to see that it's not that nice. This is the preview before taking the picture, and believe me, if I cleaned that area well, it wasn't smudged, but the preview looks like it's smudged because the camera, as I say, is behind the screen. The manufacturer makes a very good effort to try to optimize the level of detail, and honestly it does succeed. But they are not selfies that are characterized by having a very high level of detail. Although for a good number of users, the selfies of this device will be of good quality, but being a device focused on photography, I do not understand why they do not place a normal camera on the front camera. I understand why they use the camera under the screen in Red Magic, which is a device much more focused on gaming, where maybe selfies don't matter much. But in this series, I wish they would put a little more priority on the front-facing camera. The device also incorporates stereo sound with a speaker down here and another in the earpiece area for calls. In fact, oddly enough, it seems to incorporate infrared as well, but it doesn't have any apps to set up the universal remote or anything like that. So you can probably activate it with other applications. On the back, we find a tremendous photographic system. First, the main camera, which has a mm lens. Already from there, we find a completely different thing from the traditional, because usually in smartphones, the main camera is or so. So this is, let's say, a camera with a little bit more zoom in very simple terms compared to traditional cameras. Let's say it's like if you put 1.4x zoom more or less on a traditional cell phone. It has f-aperture 1.59 and optical stabilization, plus a 50 megapixel sensor. Then there is the 18mm ultra-wide camera. It is not as wide as the ultra-wide cameras of other devices, but it has f1.8 aperture, extremely bright. It also has autofocus, it also has optical stabilization, and it gives us 50 megapixels on the sensor. So it can also give us macro shots. In fact, this camera, through cropping, can also give you the 24mm focal length, if you want to have the perspective that you traditionally have on other smartphones. And finally, we find the 85mm telephoto camera with f-aperture 3.3, autofocus. It also has a high-resolution sensor, in this case 64 megapixels, and it also has optical stabilization. So it's a pretty advanced photographic system, as we had already seen on the Nubia Z60 Ultra. I've got some example pictures here. This is the 18mm camera, as you can see. It's the ultra-wide camera. It gives us good quality. With that same camera, you can have 24mm pictures, which, as I say, would be the more traditional smartphone perspective, not as wide. And then we jump to the 35mm camera, which in this case is the main camera. But as I told you, compared to other smartphones, let's say you'd be zooming in 1.4x or so, then it gives us, through a crop on that camera sensor, the 50mm perspective, which would be like if you had a 2x optical camera on other smartphones. Then we jump to 85mm, which would be about 3.5x zoom on other cell phones. So in this case, obviously we have optical quality because we're talking specifically about 85mm lens. But also this same lens with a crop on the sensor gives us the perspective of 170mm, maintaining optical quality, although it is no longer the lens specifically. But applying a crop on the sensor, it achieves a very good photograph with this setting as well. That is, it gives us more or less 7x of optical quality still. So definitely that it has a very good photographic system. This would be the 350mm perspective, which in other smartphones would be more or less a 14.5x zoom. On this smartphone, it's 10x zoom. And note that the quality definitely that looks good. Although I think this is where we find its limit, where still the picture looks good quality. This would be the 1050mm setting, and you can still get closer still up to 1750. But I find that here the level of detail drops a little bit. However, as I say, for photography it is a very good device. Okay, look at how these controls work. If you click a second time on the 18mm setting, it switches to the 24mm setting. And if you press a second time at the 35mm setting, it changes to the 50mm setting. The same thing will happen at the 85mm setting, which changes to the 170 setting. So you have some convenient presets to manage the zoom. And as I tell you, photography can become somewhat specialized on this device, which also has an expert mode with a lot of specific parameters, in addition to support for RAW photography, which obviously will be able to take advantage of the most knowledgeable. So definitely if you like photography, you could get to enjoy this device. And within the portrait mode, it also allows us to take pictures from different focal lengths. And these would be the results. I think it does detect the foreground and background well. Not with 100% accuracy. There are still some areas that it doesn't get it right. But overall, I think it's a portrait photograph that does look acceptable. As I say, at different focal lengths. Although curiously, with 85mm, I had some complications. And after several attempts, we finally managed to achieve the autofocus effect. But in fact, in this case, it was more difficult to keep the objects in focus. So portrait photography, I think, is not his specialty. And for video recording, we'll find support for up to 8K. with a 35mm lens, or up to 4K at 120 frames per second, with any of the three lenses. As you notice, in video recording it also has good features. And, in fact, they seem to have upgraded this. Because on the Nubia Z60 Ultra, when I tested it, you couldn't switch between different lenses when you had already started your recording. But in this generation you do have this capability. So I really like that. Also for video recording it could be interesting. It even has a pre-record mode, so you have a kind of buffer. And when you press the button, you already have a space recorded before. It can help you record very exact moments. And in fact, within the expert mode, you can also enter the video mode to move manual parameters. The battery is 6000 mAh and supports 80 watts charge. Definitely that capacity is very good compared to other devices. And that's another explanation why the device can be a bit heavy and a bit thick. If you hadn't noticed, it also has a fingerprint reader. And even though the camera is underneath the display, it also has facial recognition. Although you know it's a very simple two-dimensional facial recognition, so we don't pay much attention to it. It has versions with 8, 12 or even 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM. In this case, I have an intermediate edition with 12 gigabytes. And in storage, there are versions of 256, 512 gigabytes or up to 1 terabyte UFS 4.0. In this case, I have the 256 edition, so it's going to be extremely fast. It's got very powerful specs. It actually has the virtual RAM turned on by default with an additional 12 gigabytes. Completely unnecessary in my view. I don't know why manufacturers insist on giving us this. And just turned on the device marked 32.91 gigabytes used, which seems to me to be a considerably high figure. So the operating system does use a lot of space. And honestly, considering the price, I would recommend getting the 512 gigabyte version or even the 1 terabyte version if you want to use it a lot for taking pictures and videos. And finally, the processor is the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 Leading version. In fact, as I tell you, that's the difference from the last model. And the benchmarks are going to show us this performance evolution. In Geekbench, it scored 2,228 points on a single core, and 6,973 points in multi-core. It is definitely an extremely powerful device, that despite not being for gamers, it could perfectly meet those needs as well. Note that in Antutu scored 1,861,236 points, which is also a very high score. So for now, this has been all for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can tell me, and I'll see you next time.